Well, hello. This is probably one of the more anticipated tanks that is coming to the game this year. It is, of course, the BZT-70. Now, if you don't know about this tank, what's so great about it? Really, nothing. It has massive alpha damage like the FV-183, but that's about it. That's kind of probably what most people are losing their minds over trying to get this tank. Right off the bat, is it worth getting in the auction? Absolutely not. This tank sucks. It's like a Caliban, but in tier 10. Sure, it might be funny sometimes, but honestly, I wouldn't prefer playing this tank over the 183 or the Caliban in tier 8, because this tank really is just a copy-paste of the Caliban put up to tier 10. And honestly, the 183 just feels a lot nicer as a vehicle. But that's not what you're here for. You're here to see what this tank is all about and what it's capable of. So, obviously not worth it in auction, but let's just get into the stats and have a look at what this tank offers. So, there is a review of the tank on my website. It is ready by the time this video releases, so you can have a look on there without any of this commentary. So, let's look at the armor. You can see here it does have an auto ricochet upper plate, 700mm plus, so even heat won't be able to go through that, and AP will just ricochet off. But that's kind of where the good ends for this armor. The cupolas are weak, the lower plate is weak, the mid plate is weak. You can see when you turn the hull there's this weak point here, so you can't really side scrape. The side armor is pretty mediocre for a heavy tank, and the turret front is weak. You can see it's 280mm effective armor, but remember, with AP, 5 degrees of angling is removed, taking it down to closer, more like 250-255mm of thickness. You can see here this is with enhanced armor on against 260mm AP, and in this case it's like a 50-50 whether it penetrates through the turret front. So this tank's armor is really quite weak, and we don't even really need to look at the heat view to understand that. As you can see with heat, it just, all the red is completely gone except for on the upper plate. Now, something I want to mention about the armor. BZT-70 was tested quite a while ago, and the first version was drastically different to this version. So if you saw any leaks, or if you faced the BZT in battle from when this tank was first tested, don't be fooled by what it was back then, because it has been significantly changed on the armor profile since the first test. As you can see here, this is the difference, this is what has happened, and that's just on AP. It's not just the front as well, it's also the side armor, so, you know, don't be fooled by the first time you faced the BZT in battle or the first leaks that you saw. The new BZT is nothing like that original version, so just be warned, don't be fooled by what you first knew about the tank. Now, side armor, 80mm, both above and behind the tracks, which is not the best for a tier 10 heavy tank, and you do have 10mm spaced armor plating over the tracks, which isn't great because in this game it does mean that you do get, well, 3 caliber bypass rule happening, and you can't really side scrape in this tank because it has this weak point here. But hey, overall protection, it's still better than a 183 or a Caliban. You can see when you do use gun depression, it does have a bit more armor. The upper plate goes up to 3,300mm, but you can see it's just this tiny sliver here. You can barely even see the upper plate. The mid plate, 185, still very weak, and you can see that there. So you want to try hide that as much as possible, and just use the 8 gun depression with the turret armor, if you can. Also, be wary what enemies you face, because 320mm of turret armor isn't impressive at all, and well, quite a few tanks have 330mm, 340mm, so if you're facing an enemy with 310, sure, try go hold down against them. With 320, 50-50 whether they penetrate or not, but above that, most of the time enemies are just going to cut through the front of your turret. So overall, the armor performance of this tank is not good for a heavy tank. It's pretty plain to see why that is. So, the gun. This tank mounts a 180mm gun. Its ammo is AP, Premium HE, and regular HE. And for the sake of this video, because it's much easier to say, I'll just call the Premium HE HESH. Though technically it isn't, but yeah. Anyway, penetration, 250mm on standard AP. It's on the lower end, but considering you'll probably use calibrated shells, it's alright. Penetration on the Hesh is 210mm. It's pretty decent for Hesh shells at tier 10, not the worst but also not the best, and 90 on HE, which is pretty nice, especially considering your HE does do actually better damage than the Hesh. Damage on AP 910, on Hesh 1200, on HE 1350. You'll see these are pretty similar to the 183's numbers. Reload time 22.4 with a gun rammer, but you'll probably not use gun rammer, so it's 23.5 if you don't use the gun rammer, giving it 2400 DPM if you do use just the AP, or 3200 on Hesh. And of course, if you're using calibrated shells, that will go down to around 3000 on Hesh. It's not a massive difference, and honestly, calibrated is worth using, but I'll explain that in a minute. Aim time is 5.6/5.9 seconds. Horrible aim time, and that is due to the base aim time of 3 seconds, which in tier 10 I think the only one that is worse than that is the Type 5 Heavy, but that has better base dispersion and soft stats. And you can see the problem here, 0.453 dispersion. It's much worse than any other tank in tier 10, and 0.3 on move is also completely terrible, and 0.25 when turning the turret also completely abysmal. It means that no matter how lightly you try to feather the gun when moving the turret or moving the hull or tracks, it's still going to bloom out noticeably. You'll see that a bit in one of the replays which I have. Shell velocities are also terrible, 500 meters per second on AP, and 400 on the Hesh and the standard HE. That is the worst in the game, above tier 8. The only one that is worse than that, I believe, is the Caliban, which has 350 something meters per second on its Hesh. Gun depression of 8 degrees is actually pretty nice. It is like the Caliban. So, what Wargaming has done, basically, is make a tier 10 Caliban gun. It's kind of balanced like that. It's got a really long reload, got massive damage, got terrible dispersion when moving, base dispersion, and aim time, and just horrible shell velocities, but actually surprisingly decent gun depression. So basically, using this gun, it's very unreliable, but you are able to, of course, get off shots given that you take your time, you are patient, and you don't waste that kind of very long reload that you do have. I'll talk about the equipment more in a bit, but it is quite important for how you equip this gun to actually make it effective and make it properly work. But overall, not the most reliable gun, of course, with a very long reload. If you miss, it's kind of not going to be too great for you. Mobility wise, this tank is actually surprisingly decent. Top speed 32 isn't the best, but it's not terrible either. Reverse speed of 9 is terrible. It might even be the worst in the entire game. I think all the other tanks that had less than 10 kilometers per hour reverse speed have been buffed at some point, so this one having 9 might just be the worst in the entire game, so that is terrible. Its acceleration rate is 13.3, which is decent. This tank weighs 91 tons and does have a very strong engine to go with that. And for such a large tank, it actually doesn't feel super slow. The thing is, this tank doesn't have armor, and mobility kind of scales the opposite direction as armor, so generally the less armor you have, the more mobility you have. Not the case with this tank, as you have pretty unimpressive, relatively average mobility, but very bad armor, so not the best. But compared to other heavy tanks, this isn't the worst mobility. It's not super slow, it's not like a mouse, it's not like a Type 5, it's more along the lines of like a Super Conqueror, for example. But yeah, overall mobility not the best for how weak this tank's armor is, but for a heavy tank overall, it's alright. So, moving to consumables and all that, I would set the tank up like this. Your top speed is limited and your mobility is okay, so you don't need the engine power boost. Instead, go with repair kit, especially as this tank has really quite a weak ammo rack, and you will notice that. Also, I believe ASUN made a post today for the weakest ammo racks between tiers 8 and 10, and BZT-70 is the weakest in tier 10. So there is a good reason to use double repair kit. Also, a good argument for protective kit, but for me personally, I'm playing this tank for the big gun, for the big alpha, so I'm going with double food and then the fuel. But of course you can drop out one of these if you want to use protective kit. Next, ammo. This tank only carries 25 shells. You're probably never going to use all 25, but I would take 10 AP, 10 HESH. You do use those shells the most, and well, AP is very useful in the situations where you can't get a HESH shell off, especially as it does have the higher shell velocity. That is really important. Honestly, if you wanted to take a few extra regular HE shells, you could, but I think 5 is enough for this tank. The regular HE is really good for dealing big splash damage to enemy tanks when you can't penetrate their armor. I might insert a few clips here, I might not, but for example, you can deal like up to 500, 600 damage hitting the right spots on enemy heavy tanks. But equipment. So, don't use gun rammer on this tank. As much as I do like gun rammer on all my tanks, don't use it on this tank. This tank, it puts all of its stats basically into its alpha damage, and having a slightly faster reload by 1 second isn't really going to make a difference to your game, especially if you miss or if you bounce. So it's much better to actually have the reliability of calibrated shells in terms of that penetration, both for AP, HESH, and also occasionally for HE, to make sure that when you do finally make a shot, that shot is actually going to penetrate the enemy armor. So calibrated shells just more important than gun rammer on this tank. Next, just the usual stuff. I would go with engine accelerator, as this tank's traverse speed I find is okay. Next, improved assembly or enhanced armor. For the most part in the replays I was using improved assembly, but I would recommend enhanced armor because the difference between improved assembly and enhanced armor on this tank is actually pretty significant. That's the wrong armor profile. It's pretty significant. So here we can see 255mm of AP penetration from the 114 SP2. That's kind of middle of the ground penetration for tier 10. A lot of heavy tanks now have 250, 252, and a few outliers have like 257, 259 for example. So 255 is kind of in the middle, and you can see that the turret front is actually pretty reliable to penetrate for this level of penetration. But if you do put on the enhanced armor, it does make it a bit harder for this level of penetration to go through. And of course, for tanks with like 250, 252, 254, for example, like 60 TP, T110E5, the T95E6, it is going to be harder for them to go through this turret front. You may say, oh yeah, but if they use calibrated shells, it doesn't make a difference. You have to keep in mind the majority of Blitz player base, probably most of them don't even use equipment, so you do have to consider that. Occasionally you'll face a good player who does use calibrated shells or knows where to shoot, but then at that point it's a BZT facing a good player. You've already lost the game. So yeah, personally I would go with enhanced armor. Alternatively, if you did want to play the tank and just not rely on the turret armor at all, you could go with improved assembly. But this tank does have a little bit of turret armor, so personally for me I'm going with the enhanced armor. Next, supercharger. Between these 4 equipment slots here, which do affect your accuracy, you can try them out however you want to do different kinds of setups and builds. I did that when playing this tank to see what kind of difference it made, which one I would prefer, and I've made my decision for which one's best. But whatever you choose, by far the most important one to have is supercharger, because taking mid-range shots, you probably won't be shooting at long range, but mid-range shots, if you use HESH, if a tank moves just a tiny little bit, your HESH shell will bounce, or it will miss, or it will hit a track, or something like that. Supercharger makes a massive difference for how effective you can be with tanks like this and like the Caliban, for example, because their shells are just so slow that extra shell velocity actually helps massively compared to the aim time. Sure, the aim time does make a noticeable difference, and you'll see in the replay in a minute that there is quite a difference, But for me personally, just the supercharger it outweighs the aim time so much, because you can just actually hit shots at range, and you can make time for yourself to actually aim in, but you can't control the enemy's movements and, you know, make them sit still so that your shell can actually hit them. So for me, supercharger is more important than the gun lane drive. And then either of these, again, it's up to you. If you get this tank, try it out yourself, try out the different builds and setups you can do with these four, and decide for yourself which one works best for you, because, you know, it'll feel different for everyone, and everyone will have a different opinion for which one is best. But for me, this is how I played the tank when I got the replays, basically. So let's get into some of these replays. Today I did play 2 games, and they are these 2, and I did play some before the update, which I might show one afterwards. But in this game, it was the one where I was testing out the aim time equipment, and I didn't have a supercharger on. So you'll notice in this battle my aim time might be a bit quicker than in the other replay, which I'll show after this. And if you're wondering what camo this is a mod. It's the Chinese server exclusive camo. It's not the one we're getting in auction, unfortunately. But you'll see here I am going in towards the city. The enemies only have a 50B, which I will absolutely destroy, and the K91, which I can penetrate the lower plate with Hesh fairly easily. Now unfortunately the 50B gets a quick shot off onto the K91, but you can see there my aim time. Compare that to the next replay. That aim time is significantly quicker than the other replays. In terms of the effective aim time, I think it goes from 6.8 seconds down to 5.9, as in this one I do have both vertical stabilizer and gun lane drive on. But here you'll see I'm aiming in on the T62, take the shot, 1200 damage. You also notice the slow shell velocity there. I was pretty lucky the T62A did just sit there and, you know, take the hit. But just like that, T62A is down to a one shot, and you'll see in a second he goes down because he is a one shot. But essentially you can see how I'm playing this tank. I'm not pushing it on the front lines, as this tank doesn't have any armor. It's a support heavy tank. It's like the Caliban. It's like if you played a 183 on the front line or the second line. You don't want to be pushing the front, you don't want to be taking the hits. Yeah, that's a high roll. The max roll for this Hesh ammo is 1500, so getting 1447 is pretty lucky there. But you can see just half health to the AMX 50B. That is what this tank can do. That's not to say it will happen every time. In fact, you know, this game I got pretty lucky that I was actually able to come around the corner like that, only take one hit from the 50B, and then put back 1500 damage into him. But you can see there, the big front of this tank just catching the shots from the Jagdtiger very easily, and the armor not bouncing anything. But all it took was 3 shots to get that 3600 damage. So unfortunately the replay did crash right at the end there, but you can see 3 shots, one of them didn't even penetrate. It was a 500 damage into the side of the 50B, but 3 shots, 3200 damage. That is just what this tank does, and you'll see I might post a short tomorrow or something. All you have to do really is 3 shots and you've done more than the rest of your team. It is kind of like a 183 in that regard. First class mastery, getting 66,000 credits, and that was without any booster or anything like that. So the next battle is on Desert Sands. This one I am back to a normal setup. I have supercharger on and I have refined gun. And you'll see a noticeable difference in the aim time of this tank in this battle. Now again, this battle there's quite a lot of heavy tanks, and being the tank you are, you don't really want to be on the front line. You want to let your allied heavy tanks, the proper heavy tanks, actually be taking the hits for you, distracting the enemies so you can actually come around the corner and put a big shot of damage into them. And considering my heavy tanks aren't actually going to the heavy front line, I've got to follow them. So I decide to turn around. Actually my minimap's been off this whole time. I decide to turn around and follow my heavy tanks, but seeing now basically the entire enemy team pushing in, I decide to kind of see if I might be able to get some shots of enemies crossing. And hey, there's a Leopard 1. Now you can see there my aim time was significantly slower, and it may not have seemed like my shell velocity was that quick, but you know, 540 meters per second compared to 400 meters per second, it is a noticeable difference at mid ranges, but at longer ranges, you know, it probably still looks really slow. So here you'll see the M60 crossing, and you'll just see the poor on move dispersion of this tank. I'm trying to, you know, get a shot in, and each time I just move the turret a slight bit, it does just bloom out a bit more. But again, the shell velocity there, that's like a mid-range shot, helps me massively to get a shot on the M60. I honestly wouldn't have been confident taking that shot with Hesh if I didn't have Supercharger on. And in that case, the aim time wouldn't have really helped me because I was sitting still and I was already aimed in. Now that shot was just unfortunate, either aiming slightly high or just the bad dispersion of the tank. Unfortunate, only 170 damage on the E4. And now you'll see the long reload of this tank, almost 24 seconds. The E4 has already managed to get 2 shots into me, and now he's about to get his 3rd shot. He bounces off the auto ricochet upper plate, which is very lucky for me, and honestly I could have used Hesh there, but I didn't. And you'll see that this tank's armor just, it doesn't bounce anything. I got lucky that the E4 did get baited by the auto ricochet upper plate. That was just luck, really. The whole turret front of this tank is easily penetrable, and you can see the E4's penetration mark on the front of my tank's turret there. But again, quick game. What was that? 3 shots, doing, 3 penetrating shots, doing 3,500 damage. 1 lucky bounce, that was a 2nd class. Didn't make too many credits, but again, you're firing Hesh in this tank, so you shouldn't really be expecting to make credits with this vehicle. So here we are with the final replay. This one I did do before the update happened, so a bit of a different gun sound due to the mod I had installed. But this one's a bit of a more normal gameplay for this tank, or at least a more normal battle compared to those other 2, which were pretty quick games, which kind of steamrolled. But here you'll see I am in platoon with another BZT, and we're going to try go towards the top of Middelburg. And you can actually see this tank's mobility, it is actually alright, and you'll see. Again, I'm going to try make a long range shot with this gun. Not going to risk the Hesh, just using the AP. A bit of a low roll, 910 down to 770. Unfortunate, but still, at least I hit. And again, thanks largely to the Supercharger. In this one I did have Supercharger and Refined Gun on, so absolutely the worst possible aim time. But considering you have such a big impact on your shots, you should really be trying to take as much time as possible to aim each one of them. So here we have made it to the top of the hill on Middelburg. The nice thing that this tank does actually have is 8 degrees of gun repression. That is quite an upgrade compared to the 183, and you do have a bit of turret armor to utilize, but in this battle you're not going to see too much of it. But sometimes that does come in as useful, especially when you do have to take a bit of time to aim in on your enemies. Having that gun repression is, well, just nice for setting up shots. But now I see we're getting flanked, so I turn around to go back to help my team out, and then I see a juicy Minotauro in the middle of the map, hoping he doesn't notice me, but unfortunately he does. But for some reason he just turns his turret away, and, you know, free 1100 damage. I'll take that. I will take that. So in total, 2 shots, almost 2000 damage. But again, you can see just enemies poke over the ridgeline. It's so easy to get shots into this tank because it's very wide, it's very large, very slow reverse speed, so it's hard to get out of, well, bad situations. And here I'm just using the AP because you know, the 132 does have quite a lot of spaced armor. I'd rather get 900 damage on him than, you know, 500 from a fail hash. But now you'll see, unfortunately, we are losing this game. 2 bases to the enemy team, and we are now outnumbered. And, well, 2 BZTs versus a bunch of normal tanks. It's going to be a bit difficult to win either way. The Minotauro does, very rightly, load gold, which does, of course, butter right through my turret front, and I try to get one final shot out of this game on the VK, 950. But, you know, still, you could see that the tank kind of in a more normal battle situation there. In close range, the gun does do fine, given that you can hide the tank and preserve your hit points. That is how you do want to be playing this tank. It's a support vehicle, not a frontline one. You don't want to be taking the hits, you want to be saving your HP so you can actually make that massive damage work. And you can see, it did actually work out for us in terms of damage in the end. So, BZT-70, in summary, in conclusion, what's the verdict of this tank? Well, gameplay wise, it plays just like a Caliban. Sure, it has a little bit more armor, but it's not like you can actually rely on the armor. In fact, I would say relying on the armor is kind of a bait, because it will just fail on you. Unless you are actually able to go hull down and use the gun depression, you shouldn't be relying on the armor of this tank, because it may bait you into losing HP. You should treat it like it has no armor, just like the Caliban in tier 8. So gameplay wise, I wouldn't say it's anything new. It is just a tier 10 Caliban. It's a heavy tank with basically a big derpy gun, kind of like the 183, but a lot worse on the accuracy. I personally wouldn't say it's offering anything new. Sure, at tier 10 it is a bit different to the 183, but if you do have the Caliban in tier 8 and you're fine with playing tier 8, then this tank isn't going to offer you anything revolutionary. For me personally, I do enjoy playing the 183 more, just because it has the better mobility, the better accuracy aim time. You don't have to be on the front lines because your accuracy is abysmal. You can actually sit back a bit and try snipe the enemies in a 183, which you can't do in this tank. God forbid someone tries it. That would be a terrible idea. But yeah, BZT-70, I personally wouldn't lose my mind over this tank. It'll be a funny tank, it'll be a meme kind of tank, just like the Caliban is in tier 8, but up at tier 10. And of course, it may be a bit annoying to face because it does do that massive damage, and it is at closer range than the 183, and it does have higher hit points than the 183. But personally, for me, I wouldn't say this is a tank to lose your mind over in terms of its uniqueness or gameplay or anything like that. You can get it cheaper in the form of the Caliban in tier 8, or free in the form of the 183 in tier 10. Sure, ever so slightly different, but if you're paying a massive price tag, I don't think that the slight difference in gameplay is really going to matter to you. If you do have the money to waste on a tank like this, then sure, go for it. It is a pretty funny vehicle, and I must say there have been some funny moments from, well, very satisfying shots, like the one on the 50B where I did almost 1500 damage. It is very nice when that happens, and it is, well, just so satisfying for a heavy tank. But yeah, that is it for the BZT-70. Personally, for me, if I can't get this tank with gold, I'm just going to wait for it to come back. I'm not going to be spending a ton of money to try get this thing. Because honestly, when I was playing this tank in Platoon, I just enjoyed playing other vehicles a bit more. I enjoyed the BZ-75, and I enjoyed just the Tech Tree 183 more than the BZT-70. It was a bit frustrating for me, but hey, it's up to you whether you spend your money on this tank. It can be fun, it can be a pain. But yeah, thanks all for watching, and see you next time.